Well, we have a special treat today to have Claire Lai with us, all the way from Hong Kong and London and Washington, D.C., and a bunch of other places. And this is many of the staff of the Acton Institute. And we're very well familiar with your dad's case and the whole thing, and you know all our commitment to that. I've known you since you were a little girl, and we were speaking recently about a trip we made to Pompeii with your brother who was in a stroller. Lesson one with Pompeii: do not bring a stroller to Pompeii. It was not built for strollers. And Chris and I have watched you grow up over the years and become this incredible woman and a lawyer.
Not quite, but law student, I would say.
A law student, okay, a student of the law. Why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and your formation, your education, your mom?
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. Oh, I'm not used to it. So I'm Claire Lai. I'm the daughter of Jimmy and Teresa Lai. Gosh, I mean, maybe I can talk about something that will probably come up in conversation later, but my father converted 1 year after I was born, not because of me, but because of the handover. I grew up in a very Catholic family. I mean, mom's been Catholic, her whole life. And my grandmother famously told my grandpa that, if he didn't convert, they could only be friends.
It's a very persuasive apologetic tactic, I must say.
It is. It worked.
It worked.
And usually we talk about it at family gatherings, and my grandma would be like, "None of you would exist if we had good." I spent the first 13 years of my life in Hong Kong, and then I went to boarding school in the UK, and then I stayed there for university where I studied law, and then I returned to Hong Kong. I worked in Canada for a family business, and then studied a bit regarding that. And then in the middle of that, I returned to Hong Kong because my father was charged. And I think, yeah, that's the gist of it. And then I've been there for the last more than 5 years in Hong Kong, and because a lot of dad's trials were delayed and took a lot of time, and with the latest one, I mean, it took like 2 years. So yeah.
You're a person in your own right, and I feel regretful that we're not going to probe what's going on in your mind and in your life, although I think your dad's experience is predominating that in any case, so that you and your brother Sebastian really become the public face of this case, your brother handling a lot of the geopolitical things, and you dealing with the question of spirituality. And you already mentioned your dad's conversion. Can you give us a little bit more? I mean, your mom married your dad not as a Catholic, and she's too gentle a person to be maybe as forceful as your grandmother. But something happened in Jimmy's own life that prompted his conversion.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I can just sort of give a brief nutshell of sort of my dad's life. Actually, I felt that the Hong Konger done here it really captured that very well. But I guess in some ways, it's sort of in the granular details of my father's life that you can really almost see the landscape of Hong Kong through the years. You know, whether it's when he escaped communism to go to Hong Kong and work in factories as a child, and you know, taught himself English and to read the balance sheets, and then had his, and you know, he benefited from the then free market, and it wasn't until later on, actually, when he came here, and you know, he learned about Hayek and Milton Friedman and so on, that he really understood what it was as, you know, freedom. You know, it sort of gave a name to the things that he experienced, and then he sort of had his political awakening in '89 during the Tiananmen Square protests and then massacre, and really, I think during the year of the handover, when you know, Hong Kong was going to be handed over back to China. I mean, it's the place that he escaped as a child. So there were a lot of fears. There were a lot of doubts and so on. And it back then he was already surrounded by you know, many wonderful people in of the faith. I mean, Cardinal Zen, Mom. And so on.
And some of the prominent evangelical pastors in Hong Kong, some of whom are also in jail at this time now.
And it's then that he was ready to receive God's love and His grace. And I think, but you know, later on when he was in prison, he wrote to me. He said, you know, he hadn't realized it then, but even from the time he was a child, and he obtained freedom, and he was you know, obviously he had to work very hard for his achievements, but all of them were due to the grace of God, and it's the silence of imprisonment that helped him realize that. And yeah,
Chris and I met your dad shortly after his conversion, and it was at the instigation of Bill McGurn, who's a very good friend. Wonderful. And your father's godfather. And Bill at the time is, of course, a prominent Wall Street Journal journalist. He was the editor of the editorial page of the editorial page, or the Wall Street Journal Asia at the time. And he wrote to me and said, you know, I have a man I think you should meet. And he began to tell me about your dad. He said, because his two great passions are the faith into which he has been baptized and economic freedom, you know. And you mentioned Hayek and Friedman, who he knew personally, because Chris and I were at a dinner in San Francisco once when I think Milton Friedman was being awarded something. And so we met in Hong Kong. Monsignor Filoni at the time, now Cardinal Filoni, was the nuncio to that area of Asia, and we began having this conversation. So what you're saying is that there is this reciprocity between freedom and faith in your father's experience.
I mean, absolutely, and I think it's I mean, you know, I think one of the reasons my father became more prominent is the fact that, you know, he's someone who really rose to prominence not through the political channels but through the market, really. And at a certain point, you realize that it is completely inconsistent with communism and as his faith, you know.
So he's a two-time loser.
Exactly.
from the communist perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how you know, many parts of his life is in many ways providential, because it's actually there was a moment in the trial where he was asked because, you know, people generally know that he's a fan of Hayek, and they were like, "Are you someone who believes in the free market because you love Hayek?" And he said, "No, I'm someone who benefited from the free market. Therefore, I'm a fan of Hayek," because when he read it, he had already and yeah, and that there isn't. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, communism at its root is about a high degree of control, and it is, I mean, and sort of a high degree of control, and a like you see in China now, that it's like basically like it doesn't allow for any kind of dissent, and it only allows for one kind of authority, and that is extremely, firstly, I think, Father, you mentioned before, but communists are extremely afraid of the faith, and they are also they also don't understand it, and yeah.
When did you see this coming? I mean, when I spoke to your father many years ago when you were a little girl, he indicated he expected at some point to be arrested because he was quite outspoken. I mean, both through his business, Giordano, selling these T-shirts with Tiananmen Square throughout the mainland, but then even worse, with a newspaper and a whole media apparatus. So he saw it coming. What kind of conversations did you have in the family about that?
It was I think it in the family, the conversations, at least the ones I had with my father, were I mean, we understood that he was conscience bound, and he was and I guess it's a certain personality traits that some of us also get from both our parents, but he and I mean, there were conversations before where it was more asking me whether or not I wanted to stay in Hong Kong or leave, and I mean, we he was and has always been driven by like a moral kind of
compass.
Yeah. And he at least I think he raised a lot of us to try to also appreciate that. And so no one this and also back then Apple Daily still existed. I mean, it was a company where in Hong Kong alone it was like 800 people. He didn't want to leave his staff behind, and also with communists, you sort of because he experienced it as a child. He knows what happens to the people who get left behind. They get punished instead, and so he stayed. And I remember it's the first day, because so it's the 2nd of December when he was first charged with fraud, and then the 3rd of December when he was denied bail, and then the 4th of December was when I first visited him. And back then Mom unfortunately was in quarantine, but I remember visiting him, and I was crying, and because it was a bit of a shock, and he reminded me that he was in God's good hands, and I think that really has been a constant, at least it's been a constant theme in our relationship, where he has, throughout the last 5 years, he has always comforted me whenever I had certain doubts.
I want to talk about your relationship with your dad in prison. But before we get to that, I want to back up for a moment. At families' dinners, when you were just together with your mom and your dad and your brother, and your brothers, but Augustine was much younger, did you ever just say, Dad, don't do this? Let's just go move to London.
It's. I think we all knew that Dad was conscience bound to stay, and we all knew that it's a certain amount of courage that can only be explained by the Holy Spirit. It's not really something that reason alone can justify. And I think it's if we had said so, it would have. If it wouldn't have. I mean, I don't think it would have changed the result, but it would have added an extra burden on him. So that wasn't really something that that's something that we discussed, and yeah.
Good. I wanted to get that on the record, just to be sure. Now, moving to the prison, what struck me when we were being interviewed on a television show together, and you were describing some of his letters. In fact, you showed me some of them, and you have a little holy card with things that you made up
of his writings. Yeah.
What struck me about the tone of that was the similarity between Thomas More and Meg. Why don't you say something about that relationship between St. Thomas More and Meg? Thomas More, of course, was in jail awaiting his execution, and Meg would come and visit him. I think she was a little more of a nag than you were, from what I get from the letters.
Oh, well, I went to Dad to cry a lot of times when he was in prison, so I wouldn't be quite so sure. But it's I think one of the things that do one of the things that do sort of when I read St. Thomas More's letter to his daughter, there was one part where he was telling his daughter that it's not about not having fear, but it's just about being guided by your faith, and I think that's something that at least resonated a lot with me about that. And I guess it's the same. I was so sheltered growing up, and I was like, Dad treated me like a little princess. So, so a lot of his letters are directed towards comforting me when I worried, and so he ends most of his letters, if not all of them, with his prayers and the most recent one I showed you, and it was. Somehow, even from thousands of miles away, he knows exactly what I need to hear when I need to hear it, and it's like, because I had certain doubts this last week, and those were in part dispelled by those were dispelled when I went to Mass on Tuesday night, and it was Angela Merici's feast day, and it focused on her trust in providence and trying to serve our Lord regardless of his circumstances. And then a few days later, I got the letter which I showed you, where Dad was just very I can't remember verbatim, but he basically said, I am in your hands, oh Lord, like, absolutely. And there was such a confidence in the way he wrote it that it's and it started with that the fact that God is all knowing, and then it ended with the fact that he was in his hands, and it was almost like a bow to wrap up sort of
Yeah.
the doubts I had. But it's like every letter, whether it's, I think when we were interviewed together, I had just gotten a letter from him about, because I had expressed certain doubts in my letter to him, and he was sort of chiding me. He was like, "Well, why do you doubt when our Lord is so good?" And other ones when I was worried about his health and his the conditions in which he's kept. It ended with his prayer, which was how, for God to teach him how he can better offer up his sufferings to him.
The portion of that letter that you're referring to, and the few others that I've seen always kind of come back to this radicality of his relationship and his trust in Christ. And what struck me is that while he is learning that, while he is living that under arduous circumstances, what he's expressing is really a fundamental part of the vocation of any Christian, that we are to give our lives. Now, we say that, but when you see it in real time, it's a different thing.
I think it's obviously I mentioned, for as long as I've been born, we've been a very Catholic family, and but it's really the last few years that made us, especially Dad, realize, just how, I don't know if the right word is abundant, but how you can solely rely on God's grace, and that it's especially in times where you're suffering, you don't have to look very far to see God's, to see what God wants you to hear. And I think it's like when I went to Mass on Tuesday, it's like I had my doubts, and it's like God knew exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. And I think it's the same for Dad, that he, because from the very first day he told me, he told me, I'm in God's good hands, and he'll find ways to serve him from behind bars. And like God really stays true to his promise not to forsake his flock. And different people go through different kinds of difficulties, but and I think but God's presence throughout it is something that I think can speak to all experiences.
Have you seen a difference in your dad's approach to his faith before and then now that he's incarcerated?
Absolutely. Sorry. I sent you guys the list of the sort of.
I want to talk about that, but let's hold that for a second, because that's a whole conversation in of itself.
My father, before prison, he wasn't really someone who. Obviously, it's what the first day I went to visit him, he asked me to get his Bible from his bedside. So it's we were always a Catholic family, but it's now he wakes up in the middle of the night to pray, and before dawn he wakes up to read the gospel, and he used to ask the guards to turn on the lights for him, and at first they would say yes. After about 6 months they would say no. So instead he leans against the door, and there are little gaps, and he has light coming from the corridor, and he would make out the words that way. And obviously, it's not good for his back, it's not good for his eyes, and it's not good for his waist, but it brings him such an abundance of joy. And it's just something that we're extremely grateful for, and it's whether it's drawing the crucifixion or the
Tell us about this. Did he draw before he went into prison?
Oh no, he drew like stickman.
So this is a fruit of that too. We should say
Absolutely.
that this was sent in, and it says right here, it has the date on it.
Yeah.
I don't have my
May
glasses on, but
22nd.
Stanley Prison.
Yeah.
And a lot of what he's done have been these crucifixions.
Yeah, he's drawn the crucifixion. He's drawn the Blessed Mother at the Annunciation. When he was banned from sending those drawings out, he had drawn some. He had started drawing the Pietà, and he even asked me to later on to enter the 7 stations of the cross for him. And then he was like, I'm not quite there yet. But it's it's and he sent it, of course, to friends and to family, and but he also sent it to a few months after him. There were other political prisoners who also were in jail, and a lot of them were not of the faith, and he sent it to them as well. And I mean that he there is one. I mean, I think I have told you about him before, but it's that there's one that particularly touched me, and it wasn't. It's someone that Dad had asked to convert before, and when he was on remand, it was daily visits. It no longer is, but and it hasn't been since basically after the first 3 months. And when we went to visit him, that person was getting ready himself to be imprisoned, and Dad told him how much his faith helped him, and when that person went to prison, he asked a mutual friend of all of us that he said, Jimmy told me it helps to pray, so can you teach me how? It was someone who was who was really struggling with dealing with prison life, and it was someone who was prior to his incarceration, he was agnostic, and Dad drew on one side the crucifixion, and on the other he would write sort of how he should start praying, what books he should read, and he asked me to get some books for him as well. And it's someone who, when he first started praying, I mean, at first he just didn't get it. So there was a lot of back and forth between him and my father, but he kept at it. And Dad drew the crucifixion for him and told him, when things get overwhelming, just pretend like you're hiding under his feet, and if the suffering, and offer up your suffering to him. And eventually, eventually Dad got a letter back that said, I think I can feel God's grace that you told me about now. And I mean, I'm not sure if I was agnostic, I'm not sure if, when I'm thrown in a completely different circumstance, whether or not I would be able to persevere the way he did. So I was extremely touched by that story.
And you've already alluded to this now, but you've become his, should we say, librarian, or at least acquisition editor?
So,
you sent me a list.
Yeah.
Of books that you just went through your Amazon list to see what he kept ordering, and what he wanted you to order for him.
Not even that's not even that's only I'm not even. I started with 2021, and he was only in jail for a few days then, and then 2022, and I'm not even done with 2022 yet.
So you sent me just a portion. You sent me just a portion of what was in 2021 and 2022. I'm going to just read a few of them. Joseph Ratzinger's In Communio, Volume 1, Thomas Aquinas, The Summa Theologica, Fulton Sheen, The World's First Love, Romano Guardini, The Lord, St. Augustine, City of God, Guardini again, Narratives of My Life, Guardini again, The Last Things, Guardini again, Freedom and Grace and Destiny. When he likes an author, he likes an author, because there's a few more here by Guardini.
And you'll see a few more by Ratzinger. And
I see. Ratzinger, Dietrich von Hillebrand,
Hans von later on, but Hans von Balthasar.
Guardini, Bishop Barron, Cardinal Pell, John Henry Newman, Ratzinger again, the biography of Benedict, Cardinal Sarah. And then you mentioned he also, when he first went in, I was asked to provide a reading list. And among those was Cardinal Francis Xavier Nguyen Van Thuan, who was himself in prison in Vietnam. So he reads all these.
He does.
It's amazing what you can do when you don't have access to the internet and television, isn't it?
I mean, and he would there was and he had such an urge to learn from them, and like I think I mentioned it to you, but in one of his letters, which was extremely gentle and extremely kind, and at the end he put like P.S. Enter St. Ignatius's meditations, but do it ASAP. I mean, it's like I'm in a hurry, and it's like it's sort of like that as the personality which we sort of
CEO.
Right. Exactly, and some of the books he would make notes on them, and then it would come back out. But because we're not allowed to enter books with notes on them, I would reorder them, and then he'd ask me to re-enter, and he was like, "Where's my book?" And I'd be like, "I have to reorder it. Like, it's gonna take at least a week." But yeah, I mean, when he likes an author, he likes an author, and there are times when he's just like he reads a book and he would be like, just get me everything from the author, and that's pretty much at least 80% of his reading. The other 20% are really those that are related to his art, because as I mentioned, he's not someone who drew very well prior to his incarceration, so he would ask me to find books on whether or not it's how to draw the anatomy, or or several, some of the other artists to improve on his work, because drawing these is his way, is part of his way now that he's in prison of serving our Lord, and it's and I mean, quite a few people have converted as a result, and the story I mentioned is one that particularly touched me. But I know that he has tried to spread it far and wide.
The word martyr means witness, and I think what he's doing, it's strange to be talking about him because I know him, and to see the depth of spirituality. And I've seen the change, the deepening from the businessman I knew who was very interested in economics, a believer, certainly, but his passion was ideas and debates, and he's not, shall we say, a gentleman.
He's not.
I mean, in the public arena, What got him in trouble in some of his editorials? What really roiled the communists?
When Dad started Apple Daily, it was very much about providing a marketplace of ideas in Hong Kong. He thought that information was freedom, and because it provided those who yearned for information with an ability to exercise their agency. And
we should say that Apple Daily, which is completely in Chinese, and is a kind of amalgamation between, at least in an American sense, a tabloid like the Inquirer or something, and the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, both in the same thing. So people would be buying it and by the hundreds of thousands every day.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, the articles that were named in his trial. I mean, some of them are just, you look at it and you're just sort of wondering, like, what is it that's criminal about it? There was one where he told people not to engage in violence in the protests. There was one where he spoke about, I think his last name is Lee, Dr. Lee. The doctor who tried to raise the be the whistleblower about COVID in China, and who unfortunately then passed away from COVID. And he wrote about it, and that was one of the things that were considered criminal. Or there were some where he even just wrote in reaction to world events, whether in praise or criticizing it, that is part of the perfectly normal course of journalistic operation. I mean, that really was criminalized, and it's. I mean, it wasn't just an attack on my father and his colleagues, and it wasn't just an attack on press freedom in Hong Kong, but it was also an attack on, like people like myself who grew up in Hong Kong, where there was a rich marketplace of information which no longer exists now. I mean, getting any kind of news is so much harder.
Tell us how Hong Kong has changed. I went back after having not been there for a while for the trial, and neither your mother nor your father nor you knew that I was going to show up in this courtroom. And it was Cardinal Zen who pushed me into the right row to make sure that I would be seated with you. I had no idea what was going on. Tell me about that kind of environment that's going on in Hong Kong. I was struck by this city that always reminded me of a big Chinatown from New York, which is where I'm from, had now become this very dull, almost dull place.
Yeah, I mean, not just in terms of what it looks like physically now, but like it's Hong Kong has hollowed out, whether it's in relation to its freedoms or it's also that there was a certain that there is a certain I don't want to use the word disdain, but there is a certain disappointment that the people have towards Hong Kong. That means that people don't want to spend money there anymore. So that's why a lot of shops, that you saw are empty, and it's and even a lot of the structures they remain the same, but nothing is the same. It's everything. Everything, it's like you always feel like you have a knife hanging over your head, and it's people are encouraged to turn against one another. People are, there's a lot of a lot more people from the mainland, and there's also and that there are, obviously a lot less freedoms and just a lot more control in a lot of aspects, and also it's a lot less vibrant than it was. Even you can go to shopping malls that are like completely empty, and or you can go to streets in Central where it's like one empty shop after another, which used to be full, and just and it's and there is just that undercurrent of sort of misery, really, and people who were like a big part of civil society, like my father, or the people who organized Tiananmen Square candlelight vigils every year. I mean, those are. I mean, all people did was light a candle, and like that year that my father got charged for, all he did was light a candle, then go to mass to pray for the departed souls, and that was sort of a staple. That was a staple of our society in Hong Kong, because I think I mean, it's Hong Kong has always lacked structural democracy, but the certain freedoms were well protected, or so we thought, and that for me, at least, growing up, going to that candlelight vigil and going to mass afterwards was like a civic duty, and that was in a very short amount of time. I mean, a lot of things were stripped from Hong Kongers, even though the place looked just the same, and courts. I mean, I used to admire the Hong Kong legal system, and now, I mean, it's an absolute joke. I mean, it's
especially when you really know the case.
Yeah,
and then you see these people asking questions that they don't know anything about. It's like almost like somebody's put something in front of them to say.
Exactly. I mean, if you read my father's verdict, which I don't suggest you do because it's 850 pages of fluff, but it's it's like. At first, they called him. Early on in the trial, they called him a mastermind. By the time they got to the verdict, they called him a helmsman. And the only context in which I've ever seen the word helmsman used is Mao, and people are saying that she is the new great helmsman, and it's just a lot of the language is extremely. Judgments are meant to be that there are meant to be some value neutral language there, and I mean, in those 850 pages, you would struggle to find any. And even like people who said that it's not all media that's banned; it's only that is criminal. But the basis on which the judgment starts is that all media is criminal. It doesn't actually go back from that position. It doesn't distinguish between what is lawful and unlawful publications. It just uses the sentence that there's a difference, but we won't tell you what the difference is, basically.
As a pastor, when I've worked with people who have been in trauma, and very often the trauma, I don't mean just by abuse, though that's what's happening now to your father and to you and your whole family, but also a person who's undergone a traumatic experience of having to, let's say, take care of an invalid parent or something like that, and it's all time consuming. Everything is about that. And having had experience with that, where I realized that in order to be helpful to the person I'm supposed to be helping, I needed to step back from it from time to time. How are you doing in that regard? How is your mom doing in that regard?
It's I think obviously in the last few years, my dad has grown a lot in his faith, as we mentioned, but so have we, because I think I grew up extremely sheltered, and obviously we're a Catholic family, but it wasn't until these last few years that you sort of realize just how much reliance can be placed on, God's grace, and how for lack of a better word, how sufficient it is, and I think it's not even like it's sort of taking us, but sometimes it's when he was in Stanley prison, now he's in Laitico, but like I would go to St. Anne's Church, and there's a statue of the Blessed Mother, and if you're facing it, you're actually facing Stanley prison as well. And I used to kneel there and just pray, and I would feel like I'm praying with Dad. And in some ways, like it sounds boring when I talk about the judgment, but I guess like sometimes going through that in a more sort of critical way, where I'm not so much looking at it as a daughter, does help me have my break and things like that, and it's I mean mom and dad both, but I think especially dad, because he's the one I see less and worry about a lot. Like they, in his letters, like he ends them with a prayer, and it's his way of comforting me, and it works. So yeah,
that brings us full circle. That's what you began with. Claire Lai, daughter of Teresa and Jimmy Lai. For whatever else can be said about your family, your parents contributed to the formation of a magnificent woman, a strong woman, and a woman, I think, who will make a great contribution to all of us to understand the importance of faith, family, and freedom.
Thank you. And I think we should credit my mom for obviously it's obviously it's not just mom who brought dad into the faith, but she had a huge hand in that, and sometimes I say that his faith saved his life, and people who aren't of the faith might not understand that as well. But I think it's from the first day he was in prison that I realized that there was no doubt in him, and there was no hesitation. He was immediately, because I remember the first day I visited, I got a lot of things wrong, like the M&Ms, the food, everything, but the only thing I got right was getting his Bible, and he told me that's enough, because I'll find ways to serve our good Lord from here, and so it really did save his life.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.